Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to welcome all of you this afternoon for our RSIS panel webinar organized by the Indonesia program. The webinar is titled Assessing the Role of the TNI in Combating COVID-19 in Indonesia. It's great to have the opportunity for us to have two really wonderful speakers who are experts who will be able to share insights on this important topic. I noticed though that there are a number of participants from Indonesia. So let me just say a few words of welcome in this regard. Selamat sore semuanya. Saya harap semua dalam keadaan sihat selalu. Kebetulan kedua pembicara kita adalah orang Manado. Maka saya membukanya dengan sebuah salam tabiah. Terima kasih sudah mau meluangkan waktu untuk berbagi ilmu di kesempatan kali ini. For those of you who did not know what I said or unfamiliar with the specific dialects in the of the Minahasa people, I basically said peace or salam in a bahasa daerah from Minasa to Pak Frega and Ibu Diandra. It's wonderful to have Pak Frega and Ibu Diandra here with us to share their thoughts on the role of the TNI in combating COVID-19 in Indonesia. The situation in Indonesia is complicated. When it comes to COVID-19, these are problematic. If we look at the number of cases, it's practically around 600,000 cases, with a 20% testing in place. I suppose you could say that the real number is hard to ascertain. Perhaps what we have to do is multiply that with perhaps multiply by 5, to get the estimated number. So there is also a lot of cases that go undetected. So the situation is quite dire in Indonesia. We know that already 20 bupatis have passed away. Just recently, the chairman of the Nadatul Ulama, Kiai Said Agil Siraj, was also confirmed by the PBNU of contracting COVID-19, and just today, Anies Baswedan, the governor of Jakarta, has also tested positive. So more than anything, we really need to understand how this situation plays out in Indonesia, and more importantly, what are some of the key institutions doing to deal with the COVID-19 outbreak in Indonesia. The TNI, of course, as a very significant and critical institution, has been deployed to tackle the pandemic. Since 2004, there is a law specifically relating to the TNI, law number 34, that stresses the role of the TNI can play in military operations other than war. So essentially, tackling this pandemic will be a very critical part of the TNI's role in military operations other than war. Specifically trying to support the civil authorities in the context of a domestic crisis. Although, of course, TNI officers do not dominate the decision-making processes in both the national and regional COVID-19 task forces, they are extremely critical in terms of turning the corner of this crisis situation in Indonesia. Of course, the other side of the equation relates to concerns civil society activists may have over increasing the role of the TNI, expanding it in this context, and naturally the slippery slope that Indonesia could descend into, particularly growing militarization. So these are some of the questions our speakers this afternoon are going to try to address. The role of the TNI in military operations other than war, addressing the issues that civil society activists have regarding the role of the military in what is actually a civil emergency. And of course, you know, the nature of the deployment of the TNI and its effectiveness in supporting civil authorities at this particular time. We have two speakers who we have invited to share their thoughts with us on this for this webinar. May I introduce to you first Lieutenant Colonel Frega Wenas Inkiri Wang. Pak Frega and me go back some time. I guess, you know, I first met him in 2007 when we were working together in terms of the establishment of the Indonesian Defense University. So it's really wonderful, as always, to get in touch with him, and more importantly, to actually share a panel with him. And he is still with the Indonesian Defense University. Of course, he has held a number of different positions with the TNI. And he is currently a PhD candidate and a graduate teaching assistant at the London School of Economics and Political Science. For his degree program at LSE, he received an award from the LPDP, the Indonesian Endowment Fund for Education. He has two master's degrees, one from Macquarie University and the second from the United States Army Command and Staff College. And he is now working on a PhD dissertation on Indonesia's defense diplomacy evolution. We can see from his record that he is a serious thinker. He has already produced two articles for highly rated journals, the Pacific Review and the Australian Journal of International Affairs. So I'm sure you know, he's someone who is going to be a person we're going to watch in the years ahead as he returns back to Indonesia and continues his military career. Our second speaker is Ibu Diandra Menko. She is a researcher at the Center for Political Studies at the Indonesian Institute of Science, LIPI. Ibu Diandra also, I first met her when she accompanied an Indonesia Defense University delegation to RSIS. And it's great to see Ibu Diandra doing so well in her career. I know she's spoken really highly of at LIPI, and she received a master's degree in defense management from IDU, and she's been involved in a variety of LIPI projects related to the TNI, intelligence reform, and counterterrorism. So we're really looking forward to what our two speakers are going to say this afternoon. Just some housekeeping rules here. Please remember that the chat and raise hand functions have been disabled. So do click on the Q&A icon to submit your questions. So we will now hand the floor over to our two speakers. Yeah, Pak Frega, it must be very early in the morning for you in London. So thank you very much for getting up and joining us, even though it's like, maybe what time is it now? 7:40.
Yeah, 7:45. Yeah.
Yeah.
7:40.
My goodness, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to both your presentation and Ibu Diandra's presentation. So I think I've spoken too much, sorry about that. Now it's time for both of you to share your thoughts on this subject. Pak Frega, please go first. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Paul Leonard, for the opportunity. So I will just go straight to my presentation. So basically, the point that Paul Leonard highlighted, I would probably start with this slide, which is, I believe that everyone has probably noticed about, many articles wrote about the COVID-19, and I put in here three whole, where the whole world, the whole region, Southeast Asia, and also the whole country, because the context today is about Indonesia. I put the flag of Indonesia, but everyone is actually is struggling to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and perceive it as a strategic surprise. And in dealing with this such situation, most countries, they try to deploy their military, and there are varying roles that the military played at the initial phase of COVID-19 pandemic, be it as a first responder, frontliner, or they can contribute as part of this supporting elements. So you can see on the slide, various countries might have developed different approaches. Like the US, even they use the special forces to produce the masks. And Chinese military, they are involved in the medical research. And the UK, they have the mobile testing unit, and some other, like, sterilization. In even Singapore, also the military are part of the national effort to contribute to deliver the mask to the populace. So about Indonesia is actually, I think there are a couple of basic elements that TNI has contributed to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. As Pak Leonard mentioned, that's under the law number 34, 2004. We authorized to contribute for military operation other than war, especially if they're a national disaster. And in this case, because Indonesia classifies these cases in national emergency, so TNI has contributed to various forms of operations, be it enforcing or part of the support to law enforcement, where they try to help the police and the local authority to enforce the health protocol. For example, like this picture where the soldier from the district command, they try to give the mask and actually put the mask on the face of the people who don't wear masks. But we also contribute to various other operations, like the evacuation our citizens from Wuhan, and then we actually flew them to the quarantine facility that we have. We also contribute to the logistics support, especially the medical supplies, from overseas or throughout the region, because an archipelagic country, so it's a bit difficult to reach between area. That's why the military contribute to fill the gap. And also, when there was a fear that the COVID-19 posed, a big threat for health issue, so the district command personnel and collaborating with other personnel also contribute to help with the funerals. And we also actually took part in initiating full quarantine facilities and medical facilities in Natuna, and also we have Wisma Atlet in Jakarta. Also, we have at Sebaru Island and also Galang Island, where we contribute to set up a special hospital dealing with the COVID-19. So probably in general, I may say that various roles that TNI has contributed is, of course, the health and medical assistance, because it's very critical. We have our medical doctors, medical specialists as well. Even though this is, a new case, but over time we try to be part of the national effort. Especially, there's a national task force where we actually are part of it. And also logistic support, as I pointed out, humanitarian assistance in a way, not only the medical equipment, the PPE, but also the logistic support, especially those who are part of the low-level class in the society where they also need assistance. So TNI also help deliver this logistic support. And of course, this is also part of the managing of the social order, peace and order in the society, because the situation is very complicated. Maybe you can see, like in other countries, like in Africa, I think there's a big chaos, and even of the COVID-19 pandemic, it created another issues. And regarding the military effectiveness, I think because this is part of the strategy, as I mentioned earlier in my initial part, that every country actually perceived as strategic surprise. So there was no silver bullet. Everyone is struggling to find the answer to deal with this kind of circumstance. And of course, the initial response adopted by majority of countries, they try to shift to home defense, because the most priority, the national interest, is actually to protect their own citizens. And also shifting priorities, of course, in the case of Indonesia, the national government has diverted the national funding to focus on the task force in coping with the pandemic. And therefore, there are consequences that has been experienced by the Ministry of Defense and also TNI, where there's a defense budget cut. And of course, in a way, it might impact operational. That's why Michael Hanlon, one of the military specialists at Brookings Institute, he actually underlined that the military might have to accept a lower level of readiness. And of course, they can pose a threat, at least for a temporary occasion. And if we notice in Southeast Asian countries, I think not only Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, even I read on the news as well, Singapore also adopted. So it's a difficult situation, not only for one single country, but for everyone. As I pointed out in my previous slide, the whole world, the whole region, and the whole nation or country. And of course, because it is new, everyone is trying to adapt with the new circumstance, because it's a new dynamic. And various roles military took part, and probably it depends on how the national government actually give authority to the military to contribute. And of course, this effort is actually aimed to prevent wider consequence, because social economic impact might create a disorder which even can trigger further chaos. That's why we try to help the national effort to prevent from this thing happen. And of course, we also contribute to support the national task force, because there's a central national task force and also a regional task force. And we are in line with that, because we have our district command, part of the territorial unit is actually in line with how we actually can contribute to the program issued by the government. And most of the activity, I think this is quite common as well. We shifted to online activities like the meetings, even like exercises, even though at this stage, it's going back to the normal mode, even though it's not fully operated that way. So the second phase of the COVID-19, after we have adapted, we try to introduce the new normal. And there are actually two elements in terms of TNI's context. First is the combat readiness. So we try to maintain our combat role, because at this stage, we divide the role actually for supporting the COVID-19 is actually given to the territorial unit or territorial command, because their focus is actually dealing with the society. But the combat role, combat support unit, they are still maintaining exercises. They are doing patrol, all the services, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy. Also, they contribute to other other form of military operation other than war. And recently, I think all services, they have also conducted a major exercises. For example, like the Army, they are organizing a large unit of conventional exercise in Batu Raja, and also the Navy, they just recently conducted major naval exercise. As you can see here, the Chief of Navy, Indonesian Navy, he was supervising the major naval exercise on also the Air Force as well. And you can see actually at the very right part is the Operation Tinombala. While the supporting role is actually ongoing, provided by the Territorial Command and also by the medical units, we have a large number of military hospitals scattered all over the country, and we try to contribute to provide COVID-19 treatment and organize our PCR lab and also the medical equipment. So there are around 80,000 personnel are involved in the process of dealing with the COVID-19. How about the future? Because of the participation of TNI, as I mentioned, that we divide two different roles, whether conventional or which is related with the combat role, because we believe that we have to manage that primary task, authorized by the Constitution. And the second part is contributed to the COVID-19 National Task Force. So for the future military operation other than war, there could be an unexpected scale of similar issues like pandemic. That's why through this pandemic we learn and we try to revise our doctrine, SOP, standard operating procedures, and also the logistic support, how we distribute, actually is trying to be improved by the way that we are dealing with this kind of pandemic, because the threat is real. Also, it improved the interagency approach with the agency, because usually when we are dealing with the disaster relief, it was focusing on one certain area. But with this COVID-19 pandemic, it means that the 34 provinces are dealing with the same problem at the same time, and that is very complicated. And even not only for Indonesia, but also for military all over the world. And because the national government tried to focus on this priority, they use military as a means to achieve these ends. And of course, the consequence for the development of the personnel, equipment, and probably the new units will also be a positive contribution. And of course, there's also probably the limitation on that one. It will perhaps require more funding for that, and it depends on how actually Indonesia can provide the funding for the military. So here is the picture of border security patrol. They wear the mask, also the exercise, they wear the mask, and also part of the National Task Force COVID-19. So I think those are the three key issues that highlighted based on Leonard mentioned earlier in his actually welcoming brief. I think that concludes my presentation. I'll give it back to Pak Leonard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Frega. Appreciate your presentation. Now we move to Ibu Diandra. Ibu Diandra, the floor is yours. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Professor Leonard. Let me share the screen first. Okay, hopefully you can see it just fine. Okay, first of all, I would like to say once again, thank you all for coming today. I'm very honored and humbled by your presence. And today, as Pak Leonard mentioned before, we are going to talk about the role of Indonesian military in handling COVID-19 pandemic. And if Pak Frega focus on how it affects military effectiveness, in my presentation, I will focus on its impact towards civil-military relations in Indonesia. So to begin with, I will give you an update, a brief update, as Pak Leonard also already mentioned in the first, the coronavirus cases in Indonesia has been continuing to rise, and at the end of November, actually, it reached about 500,000 cases. So, like you can see in this graph, it shows us a really worrying trend because there's no sign of it slowing down. So under these circumstances, Indonesian government, like Pak Frega mentioned before, like many other governments in the world, has been involving their military to support civilian authorities in dealing with this pandemic. So involving the military itself is not a unique case because it has been adopted by many countries lately. So it has become a common practice right now. So in that context, some of you might wonder, so what's the problem actually with involving the Indonesian military or the TNI to handle COVID-19 in Indonesia? Despite of tremendous role and support that has been conducted by the TNI, as Pak Frega mentioned before, there are at least 3 problems that occurred, and I will discuss each of them in the following slides. The first is legal problem. The law of the TNI or the law of Indonesian military actually has regulated about military roles in non-defense spheres, or as we know as military operation other than war. There are 2 important points that regulated under this legislation. The first is the variance of Mutua itself, which this legislation identifies 14 variants, which 3 of them are related to coronavirus handling, which are disaster relief, supporting the police, and supporting civilian authorities. This point, very first point is fine, there's no discourse about it, and everyone is happy about it. But the second point is about the deployment provision. This regulation also stated that all military operations, including military operation other than war, should be conducted under state political decision, which refer to a decision made by President together with the House of Representatives. This is actually where the problem occurred, because the Indonesian government has never issued any of state political decision as a legal basis for military involvement in handling COVID-19 issues. The involvement itself only based on president verbal direction and several other legislation related to coronavirus governance in Indonesia, such as establishment of COVID-19 task force and so on. But the other regulations certainly could not be considered as a state political decision, since it's only made by the president, not together with the House of Representatives. That's why it cannot be considered as a state political decision. So there's a legal problem with this involvement. And that very first problem brings us to the second problem, which is the tendency of militarization. Without a clear and rigid legal basis, there are no clear reference to for the military involvement objectives and the limitation, which later trigger public discourse on militarization of COVID-19 handling in Indonesia. The tendency of militarization itself could be seen in its vague context of involvement. Conceptually, any of Mutua operation, or in this matter, military involvement in handling COVID-19, is conducted if there is any occurrence of crisis. So the question is, how can we define this crisis? If we refer to Huntington, well, the crisis can be defined as a situation where the responsible civilian institution is no longer able to handle it. When the crisis has passed, or when the responsible civilian authorities are able to handle it, ideally the military should not longer be involved. However, it is not the case in Indonesia. It seems like the military is involved constantly regardless the context of situation. As we can see in this table, the TNI has involved even before the COVID-19 outbreak or when the crisis have yet emerged. During January and February 2020, they have been asked to conduct evacuation operations and provided isolation facilities, as Pak Frega mentioned before. And the involvement continues as the outbreak of COVID-19 cases in Indonesia between March up until May 2020, the government of Indonesia was implementing the large scale of social restriction policy, or SSR, is similar with lockdown policy in other countries, which could also be considered as a situation of crisis that gave just justification for the military to be involved. Therefore, in this situation, in LSSR policy, I could argue that military involvement might be needed and understandable that their involvement is in the context. However, what is confusing is when the lockdown policy is terminated, as Indonesia was entering the new normal era, surprisingly, the TNI remained largely involved. As you can see in this table, even in August, the role of military has been expanded to economic sphere. This could be seen in the appointment of Army Chief of Staff as a deputy head of COVID-19 handling and National Economic Recovery Committee. Although the government argues that the involvement of military in economic matters is to help distribution of logistics, many defense analysts question its relevancy and so the appointment is too exaggerated. So the next problem is about the proportionality problem. So about the deployment, the increasing deployment. It is known from official statement in mass media that government of Indonesia had been deployed about 20,000 military personnel in June, and the number actually has been increased in September during the new normal era. In that context, the public are questioning why did the government increase the number of military personnel during the new normal era? What is the urgency of that? It's if we compare to another country, like took UK as an example, the number of military personnel deployed has been gradually reduced as it entered normal phase. So it is deployed about the same number, is 20,000 in the mid 2020, but right now in November, the number deployed is only about 2,000 military personnel. And further, the massive involvement of TNI also have implication towards defense budget. So it is known in April 2020 that the TNI reallocated its budget of nearly 200 billion rupiah for handling this pandemic. This condition is certainly worrying because the defense budget allocation should be aimed for the military requirements and to maintain its professionalism. And if we compare to the state health budget, it becomes even more ironic because in July 2020, it only has been used below 2%. So what is the impact to the civil-military relations in Indonesia? These three problems eventually showed us that the TNI involvement in handling COVID-19 has not been followed by rigid and measurable indicators. In that context, it is actually not too surprising that the role of TNI continues to expand over time. However, what needs to be highlighted is that these conditions show us a strong indication of militarization in Indonesia. And it must be acknowledged that the tendency of militarization itself did not just occur during the COVID-19 handling. Actually, in the last 10 years, the military has been involved in various civilian missions without legal basis, as the TNI law mentioned, the state political decision, or even crisis context. In this case, we could say that this phenomenon has once again boldened the characteristic of Indonesia's civil-military relations. The pragmatic attitude of the civilian authorities that see the TNI as a standby forces which can be deployed for anything, and their permissive attitude to ignore the provision of TNI law are factors that prompting militarization in Indonesia, as well prompting unhealthy civil-military relations. Therefore, the involvement of military in handling COVID-19 has again become an important momentum to the dynamics of civil-military relations in Indonesia. If the involvement prolonged and continues, it will create further and serious problem to CMR and democracy. But apart from that, I could argue that to break the tendency of militarization itself, the main key actually lies with the government itself. If the government fulfilled the TNI law provision, there will be a clear limitation to military involvement, which can be useful not only to maintaining healthy civil-military relation, but also to maintain military professionalism itself. So I think that's all for my presentation. Looking forward to discuss with you all.
Excellent, Ibu Diandra. Thank you so much. When I think about it, we are so pleased that you are able to share these thoughts, because in reality, this is what we had all envisaged with the creation of IDU, that IDU would train a good number of people with a good number of civilians with defense and security expertise, who would be able to make a contribution in the security sector. So wonderful, absolutely wonderful to note your contributions in this context. Also, I wanted to begin first by asking Pak Frega whether there are aspects of Ibu Diandra's presentation that he would like to comment on before we move to the Q&A session. And likewise, Ibu Diandra, do you have also some points you want to raise relating to Pak Frega's presentation? Pak Frega, please proceed.
Thank you, Pak Leonard. Actually, I just want to probably share my comment on 2 points. I think in perceiving the involvement of TNI, there's a certain consideration, not only, but having probably consider the task which is stipulated by the law number 34. But perhaps in a way we should also see probably like the culture of the society. So I think that could be another reason why the military is used, especially when you're dealing with the people and local people, and there's a mess. Sometimes if the man in uniform is being used, it will be easier, especially the connection that the military has with the people, because of the territorial commander we have. We have quite a bonding with the local society, and it really helps translate the policy of the government in a way. The second point is actually, I noticed Bu Diandra highlighted very, very good, some key important aspects of the CMR, civil military relations. And she also used the case of UK. But I think if it is not apple to apple, because the size of population is totally different. I noticed that she compare the 20,000 personnel within Indonesian armed forces and the UK, and then reduce significantly. But bear in mind that our geography as an archipelago, so you can probably consider if it's a continental where the whole area is one spot, while Indonesia you have 17,000 islands, and the threat at the same time, as I pointed out earlier, at the same time, and all area are facing the same issues because of this COVID-19 pandemic. If we consider the ratio between personnel involved and the total population, as well as the size and the configuration of our geography, I think it is not an apple to apple. Doesn't really fit to the comparison. But I agree with her point that probably, like the clear signal from the government, from the TNI side, we can't control the top leadership. We just follow instruction based on the law that we refer to, and also as long as it's directed from the top national leadership. As a military, we have to implement that way, because it's the key aspect of democracy, civilian authority over the military. I think those are the two aspects that I want to probably add based on my understanding on her incredible presentation. Thank you, Pak Leonard. Thank you, Bu Diandra.
Thank you, Pak Frega. Ibu Diandra, do you have points you would like to raise relating to Pak Frega's presentation?
Yes, actually, I really appreciate Pak Frega presentation. Is very detailed of what explaining of what TNI has been doing along this year. But once again, I would like to highlight the 2 points that also brought out by Pak Frega, and I couldn't agree more. Actually, it's the culture of the society itself that put the TNI as a standby forces to help the government to manage any of crisis occurred. But however, there's actually 2 points that become a problem. The first is the political will of the civilian authorities or the government itself to follow the rule of law, because it's simply we are a democratic country. That's why we have to follow the rule of law. And the second point is about the lack of civilian capacity. It is known that the Indonesian institution in dealing with this disaster still heavily depend on the TNI, because the capacity itself is not well built. So if anything happens, if the crisis happens, if disaster happens, so the government tend to ask the military to come in without any consideration of the civilian capacity itself. And the second point about the for comparing Indonesia and England, I know it is not apple to apple. I just want to give a brief comparison. But previously, I tried to make a presentation about the deployment, and it is known that if the 20,000 military personnel is about 5% from all Indonesian military personnel. And for England, 20,000 personnel is about 20%. So at the mid 2020, actually, Indonesia have a lower percentage comparing to the UK. But in UK, it is already below 5% right now in November. So, and while in Indonesia it's still increasing, it is not up to 20%, but it's still increasing. That's the point. What I want to make is the number of the personnel itself continue to increase without considering the fact or the situation in the field and what is really needed in the field. I think, yeah, that's my point so far, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Diandra, Pak Frega. Interesting points that you have raised, which I'm sure we will follow up in greater detail in the Q&A session now. And I'm looking at the Q&A box here, and the questions relate very much to 2 areas. One would be the area of operational readiness, and the other relates to militarization, topics that both of you all have touched upon, but perhaps can go into greater detail. Let's start first with the issue of regional autonomy. I think we need to look at that closely. There's a question here relating to the constant push and pull between central and regional government. And how does the TNI effectively address these challenges in terms of executing the role that has been designated to it by the central government? Pak Frega, Ibu Diandra, would you like to, Pak Frega, Ibu Diandra, would you like to respond?
Okay, Pak, thank you for the question about regional autonomy. Well, basically, as I pointed out in my presentation, we have the territorial structure, territorial unit. So up above from the national level up to the, I think we have Koramil for, I don't know in English, but kecamatan. We also have a district command for Bupati, Kabupaten or Kota Madya level. And I think they become the mediator because, of course, we can't work by ourselves, and it's actually the role that we have provided is part of the supporting role, not necessarily we are taking over the lead, because actually we are trying to help the national task force, and even not national task force, they have a structure as well up to the lower level to the regional level. So the way we try to mediate, because we have a single line structure, chain of command, and we have the same SOPs. So we try to stick to those SOPs, and also a number of presidential regulation issues during this pandemic. And because the day-to-day practice, the district command, we are liaising with the head of the regional area, Bupati, and also at Koramil level is actually Camat and so on, also with other agency. So we try to collaborate with them. And of course, the directive from the national government is the priority, because that's our actually the most primary concern. Because what we see actually at the local level, at the regional level, might be different from the top level, because they see the whole picture of the 34 provinces. And some initiative actually have been invented, like what I know, like in Kalimantan, they work, one of the Kodim district command, they initiated the sterilizer for those who work in the market. So they create, these military personnel create a box, so people can just put all the equipment in there with the UV, and then it will be sterilized. And also floating medical clinic. So based on the government, I mean the national government directions, we try to also improvise based on the situation in the local level. So we kind of like a bridging effort between the national government and the regional level. But again, there are certain precautions law that we've been referring to implement this kind of role. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak. Ibu Diandra, do you have any comment?
Yes, I agree with Pak Frega actually, because the local government are accustomed to collaborating with territorial commands. So they have experience to collaborate and how to working together, including in this case in dealing with the pandemic. But I think the budget might be a problem might be an issue for the TNI in cooperating with the local government, because the budget, some of it is from national and some of it from regional. So there will be a lot of scheme, and we don't know how to manage all that scheme. But further, I want to bring further, actually, this question reminds me of the issue of the safety of military personnel itself, because I don't think that they have adequate like mask, shield, and like a coat. They don't have enough what do you call it? Enough medical support like that. So we can also see that hundreds of TNI personnel already tested positive for coronavirus. So I think the safety of the personnel itself is important, that it is still become a problem for the local government or the national government, how to give them that. I think, yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, there seems to be some technical difficulty on my side, but we are still good. Things are okay, at least in terms of my ability to communicate. The next question I think that we should focus on is really the operational readiness of the TNI. When we think about the challenges faced in terms of deploying a TNI for military operations other than war, and the scope of its operations across 34 provinces, how does this situation impact on the TNI's operational readiness for combat duties and securing the archipelago? Pak Frega, please begin first with this question. Thank you.
Okay, Pak, thank you for this question. Operational readiness, I actually highlighted this question in my presentation. Of course, the primary role of military is to provide the combat role. And as experienced by many other countries, of course, the initial phase, as I pointed out in the slide, there was I think it took some time for countries to adjust with the situation. And I can see that at the initial phase of the pandemic, every militaries have been impacted, including in the Southeast Asia region, also Indonesia, and probably perhaps Singapore and some other countries in the region. But after the new normal, after we observe the situation and we can calculate and we try to adapt, for example, like the health protocol that we are currently adopting within the military bases. We are now we've been trying to manage our routine operation. For example, like the patrol, the sea patrol, air patrol. We do it on a daily basis, and as part of the preparation for combat role, or part of the cycle, we still conduct our regular exercises. I mentioned that in Batu Raja, large-scale military exercises, and of course, with the health protocol, I think it's a bit odd because they are doing exercise or doing, the routine with the masks and some other probably protective equipment as well. But in a way, this might probably give some impact as well, because even though military, but if you, let's say, I'm now teaching. When I'm teaching, I'm supposed to wear a mask. It's a bit difficult, you speak, and even for the student, they can't actually take off their mask. And of course, for exercises where you're doing physical activity and you have to wear your mask all time, that would be difficult as well. But I think this is a critical point that highlighted that we have to manage, balance the combat role and supporting role. We are fortunate because we have territorial command, territorial unit that we can be assigned for the supporting role for dealing with the COVID-19. So at this stage, we have been activating all the combat role-related activities. That's what I observe. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak. Ibu Diandra, please proceed.
Well, I don't have any comments actually. It's all been explained by Pak Frega. Yeah.
Okay, no problem at all. Let's move on to the next question. I do believe this is this relates to again the issue of militarization and the question of whether militarization is attributable to the ideology that the TNI is the protector of the state, or militarization of COVID-19 or is militarization of the COVID-19 handling based on rational choice, that it increases efficiency. It's a very interesting question. Ibu Diandra, would you like to tackle this question first?
Okay, thank you, Professor Leonard. Yeah, I think both argument is true, because the ideology that it is a unique ideology for Indonesian military that have a ideology that TNI as a protector of the state. It become a push factor from the internal military. They feel responsible to tackle any crisis or any problems that occurred in society. But however, the militarization of COVID-19 is also have a pulling factor. It is the civilian authorities itself. As I mentioned before, that the civilian authorities, they have a tendency to become not really rational, but very pragmatic, because if it's rational, they will be following the TNI law itself. Because actually, if the government willing to make a state political decision, I think that the House of Representatives also would not rejected the proposal, because I think all of the stakeholders might agree with the military involvement. But what is important from the state political decision is the limitation of the involvement itself, like the timing or the objective or the context. So it will provide a clear context for the involvement itself, but it's not taken by the government. So yeah, the civilian authorities pulling factors is their pragmatic and permissive attitude towards the military itself, while the pull factor from the internal is the ideology, the TNI as a protector of the state. I could agree with both arguments. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Ibu Diandra. Pak Frega, yeah, I guess, you know, as a TNI officer, you have to always deal with this issue of whether the TNI is actually a reformed institution. I know that you have a tremendous commitment to professionalization, and you know, your time in LSC is probably indicative of your commitment to see the TNI evolve into a different type of institution. Perhaps you can share a little bit about your thoughts on this issue of reform, you know. But also, more importantly, I think it's important for our audience also to perhaps get your sense and Ibu Diandra's sense of whether Indonesia is a unique operating environment, you know, that requires a military, not in the traditional sense of the military that we understand, you know, particularly evident in the literature on civil military relations, and you know, the types of definitions that relate to military professionalism. How does one define military professionalism in the context of the TNI, its history, its attempts to reform itself during the course of the Reformasi era? Pak Frega, please, and then Ibu Diandra. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Leonard. It's a very interesting and critical question, Pak, about the reform. I think regarding to the question asked about the militarization and you tied up with the reform, I would probably say that it is important to bear in mind that probably based on the historical context, the conception or the creation of Indonesian military might be different with other countries where we began with the people, and that's why we consider as our identity, or probably some might say as an ideology. But I would probably say is as a culture of our military that might be different, because the Western way of their military, Western culture of their military might be different with us. But the good thing is of our culture is actually we have a close relationship with the local community, with the society, and it's not only with our own people, as we experience in peacekeeping mission, like Lebanon, we can easily mingle with, the Lebanese and also the local populace. And even it is not surprising when we are deployed in Congo for mission under Chapter 7, which is very hostile. But we could actually build a rapport with the local populace. A great number of people actually surrender and gave up their armaments, weapon as part of the DDR. And this has been appreciated by the United Nations. I remember I did my research at the UN headquarters, and I spoke with the military advisor, and he highly appreciated this kind of stuff. So in a way, this culture also contributed positively. But if we consider, contrasting with the Western way or other militaries from other parts of the world, there might be different, because at this stage, the priority of the government could be different, and we try to maintain the stability, because the priority of President Joko Widodo is actually trying to strengthening the economic element of our nation and country. So hopefully we can leap and progress significantly. And regarding the reform after era reformasi, military professionalism, I would say probably there is, I don't know, maybe I could say probably misperception or a bit misleading, where people tend to think about the return of the so-called Dwi-fungsi, because as officer who are born in the reform period, I think we are now focusing on modernizing our military, especially after the gap of I wrote in my article as the lost decade, where we were experiencing difficulty for the embargo, applied by the US and the allies. So we are trying to catch up with this modernization agenda with the minimum essential forces. And of course, based on my experience, we are trying to also leverage this capacity, even though we can't, forget or ignore our culture. We have to be bonding with the local populace, with the people. That's why we still manage the territorial command. In a way, I would say probably the territorial command dealing with this national pandemic like this thing is actually effective. But maybe, as Budiandra pointed out, the legal formal needs to be probably revised or touched upon, so it will give more legal foundation. But I don't know, maybe in previous cases of disaster, whether the government also needs approval from the House of Representatives. I think maybe what we need at this stage is actually identification of different scenarios. So once we have those kind of scenarios, the worst case scenario, probably that can propose as part of the SOPs, as I recommended, that could be part, even in the UK, if I read the Joint Doctrine publication, they also consider lacking of civilian capacity. And in some cases, I noticed in UK, there's also lacking of capacity of the civilian, because different environment that they have, if you are being prepared for a conflict or a war, it means that you have to be fully, ready, full readiness, different with the civilian, where some extent maybe because of the climate change or other things like pandemic might disrupt their routine or their operational. That's my thought on that one, Pak Leonard. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak. Ibu Diandra, your views, please.
Okay, thank you, Professor Leonard. Wait, where's my point? Oh, here. Okay, so I think when Indonesia entered the reform era, there is a strong will from both internal and external military for the military withdrawn from the politics. That's why we have the law of the TNI that maintained the military to be out of the politics. But if we take a look on the reality, at least in the last 10 years, actually, the involvement of military in civilian sphere has been increased because the military chief made MOUs with civilian, many of civilian authorities and an institution. I believe probably right now it's already about 100 MOUs. So they have a civilian, they conducted civilian mission based by the MOU itself made only by the military chief of staff with the head of some civil civilian institution. I think this is where the trend is makes us worried, because I think in democratic country, at least if you're not involving the House of Representatives, the control of the deployment, the control of military deployment should be in the hands of the president itself. It's the consequence and it's a consequences as we took and consequences because we adopted the democratic principle in 1998. So yeah, I think that's what makes the current development in Indonesia that makes unique, because the MUTWA, or the military operation other than war, is being used as a justification for military to be involved in civilian affairs, and further it also made to justify the MOUs between the military chief and the head of civilian institution. Okay, thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Ibu Diandra. I think this is important for us to try to grapple with, because I think some of our attendees are interested to know a little bit about how the two speakers differentiate the TNI's involvement in the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 as opposed to the military's involvement in domestic crisis during the New Order era. How can we understand the differences in the approach? Perhaps we ask Pak Frega to begin first.
Thank you, Pak. What I perceive actually the difference between New Order and the COVID-19 pandemic national effort, I think it's totally different, because during the New Order era, there's a strong bond between the military and the top leadership, which is President Suharto at the time. So all the directions, I mean, the big strategy is actually crafted, formulated by the top leadership. And he used the military for a political will. But in the context of COVID-19, when we are dealing with a pandemic, we have already, the law, regulation, SOPs, despite probably the issues that Bu Diandra pointed out, the MOUs. But there's a clear civilian authority over the military, because even though probably it's a verbal direction that could be legitimate for the military, because instruction by the commander-in-chief. And I think the priority of president in utilizing military for the pandemic, because I don't see a similar case in New Order era that we actually experience multiple spots at the same time in the national scale, which is very challenging for every country and every nation. So I think probably because of the observation from President Joko Widodo and his priority, because as I mentioned earlier, in terms of culture, resources, and the speed is actually one of the critical elements when he wants to respond, because otherwise, if he has probably a slower response by not using the military, he will get a more, critiques by the people. So I would say probably it's the dilemma for even for top national leadership everywhere, whether you're not using the available assets and will slow down and will got harder critiques, or even push from your people, or you try to contribute even though there's still criticism. But again, the point made by Bu Diandra is very important about out of politics. I would say probably at this stage, we are committed not to get involved in the politics, as if the case there's a direction from the top leadership, from president, of course, we can't actually refuse, because it's based on our rules of thumbs. We have to follow instruction. But probably one thing that I want to highlight is trying to differentiate between the case of retired military and an active military, because it seems that people may have taken for granted, retired military, it's about the same like military. If we say in major democracy like the US and UK, even retired military officer, they are considered pure civilian, and they can be given any political opportunity, political appointment, like minister, secretary of state, secretary of defense. But in recent discussion, especially like some of the journal articles I read, that they try to portray that retired military personnel is the same like military, even though different context with Indonesia. But I would say it's a bit misleading, because it's discrimination for military officer. Otherwise, no one would be willing to join the military, because after you retire, you will not be able to access your right as a pure civilian. I think this is a critical point to highlight as well. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Frega. Ibu Diandra, could you reflect a little bit on Pak Frega's points, but also help us understand the issues that the civilian government is facing at this moment? I think, and some of the attendees are highlighting the fact that there are concerns about the ability of the Indonesian government to handle this crisis, and whether it is handling the crisis adequately enough. And in this context, this dependency on the military, as someone who is a civilian observer, Ibu, what are your thoughts? Is the civilian authority too dependent on the military? How can this dilemma be addressed? Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Professor. So for the first question, I basically agree with Pak Frega, the involvement, the TNI involvement in handling COVID-19. We could not see it in the same way with the TNI involvement in New Order era, because, well, we could say that there's a low political interest. It is not used to securing the regime. But if you look at the bigger picture, actually, the military involvement in civilian affairs, there's one issue, I think it's last week. One of Territorial Command's office is having an operation to remove a billboard from a particular Muslim organization that seem that being perceived very critical and for opposing the government. So, well, it is not that it is wrong, but the law enforcement task should be conducted by the police, not the territorial command. And this practice actually has become a common practice in Indonesia. That's why it's worrying the civil society. So the second point about the issue of civilian government facing is there they are too dependent for the military. Yeah, I think if Indonesia is faced by a crisis like disaster, if we look at the Aceh tsunami in Aceh or in Palu, yeah, the government is always depend on the military, because the civilian institution itself, although we have a National Disaster Agency, I don't know in English the full name of the institution, but the National Disaster Agency, the capacity is not built, is not well built. So the National Disaster Agency itself is depend to the TNI for deploying for personnel, for the equipment. So everybody, if when it comes to crisis, well, it is the perspective is it is normal to involve the military. It is if the crisis occurred, then it is the problem of military. So that is what happens in the perspective or in the government itself. But well, I can argue that it should not be like that, because it is part of civilian institution that has to handle all the civilian problems, all the civilian tasks. If it could not be handled by the civilian institution, then we have an option. Also, it is also only an option to involve the military, but not has to be like that all the time. I think that's what the government of Indonesia is still well confusing about it. Okay, thank you, Professor.
Yeah, this is always a worrying situation, the TNI and its expanded role, and what it could mean. Because, are you in a situation where you are giving liquor chocolate to an alcoholic, you see, and just encouraging the greater involvement of the TNI in a more expanded role. But we will take Pak Frega's perspectives at face value, Pak. I think, reform is a long process. And of course, the TNI is a very important institution, and it can contribute in what is really an archipelagic-wide crisis. And I want to go back to that issue in so much as the TNI has basically gone through some restructuring recently, in the context of the creation of the Kogab-Wilhan structure, as well as the Kogasgabhan, the 4 integrated joint task commands. Could you share a little bit about these new change structures? What do they do? How do they contribute in terms of creating a better joint combined force capability, and also how these different task forces function within the context of dealing with the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you, Pak, for the questions. I think the restructure of the recent TNI organization, it goes back to the previous, before President Joko Widodo, because I remember, I think during President Yudhoyono, I was involved in the discussion in the working group, preparing, planning this kind of stuff. And I would say probably the restructure of this organization is actually try to speed up the decision-making process, because as we may see, probably, like other, like India, they set up the Joint Forces Command. So integrate the Navy, Air Force, and the Army. So in a way, it's kind of like probably enhancers of the decision making, because the 3 Kogab-Wilhan, they report directly to TNI commander, Panglima TNI, and they organize all assets, be it from the Army, Navy, and Air Force. And I think having an archipelagic geographic posture, that would be a benefit for our military, even though probably some might argue that in the past we have Kowilhan, and then we try to now revitalize this kind of structure because, you know, of the evolving dynamics, evolving probably security challenges in the region. And also as an archipelago, we have so many spots. That's why we need to, you know, synchronize. And of course, with the modernization agenda that we have, with the you know, defense procurement, defense platform that we have, so by having this kind of Kogab Wilhan will help integrate and synchronize the efforts. And I think in terms of dealing with the pandemic, as we see that Kogab Wilhan at the time, now the Chief of Navy, he was actually organizing the effort, which is helping accelerate the process of deploying the military resources, be it from one of the services. And I think probably I want to touch one point on Budiandra's comment about using the military for, I mean, disaster like dependency that you mentioned. I think if it's the case where it is like you know, the scale is massive and it's a new phenomena, like in Palu liquefaction, which is a new phenomena, like, you know, tsunami in Aceh. So there was no capacity of the civilian agency to deal with. Even, I mean, even like in the UK, even for flood problem, they still requested the military. They have the SOPs. They still ask for the military to help because of the readiness of the logistic equipment. But probably this could be, I mean, formulated in a more official way, because at this stage we have those SOPs, but we refer based on our own SOPs. Maybe probably at the national level there could be like tactic or doctrines, I don't know, in a way that could be articulated more clearly in terms of the interagency approach, so people will be educated properly. I mean, because Budiandra is a graduate from Unhan, she knows well about those kind of stuff. But what we need is actually to educate public wider, so people might understand better. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Frega. Ibu Diandra, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think, well, going from the last that Pak Frega comments about involvement of the military, yes, I agree there's no SOP, but actually the law itself is not being followed by the government. It is okay to involve the military. It's not a problem, actually, if the lack of civilian capacity of the crisis occur is, well, it is understandable if we involve the military. The involvement of the military itself is not a problem if it follows by a limitation and a clear objective. So we know that once the condition return to normal, so the TNI won't be involved in a civilian mission. I think that is all where we put the boundaries. And the second point is about the organizational restructuring. Well, I don't have many comments about this, but I saw this very positive because it increased the interoperability between forces for handling combat and non-combat missions. So I think this is a very good reform step for military reform in Indonesia. Thank you, Professor and Pak Frega.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes, and we've actually covered practically all the questions. So in this 5 minutes, Pak Frega, Ibu Diandra, I'd like you both to discuss what is the exit strategy for the TNI. You know, the greatest concern, of course, when we talk about military role expansion is where the limits are set, you know, in terms of having a proper exit strategy. So how long do you envisage the TNI playing this this supportive role. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Pak.
Frega, please.
Yeah, thank you, Pak. This is another important point as well, Pak, exit strategy. And I think this should be formulated not by the TNI itself, but because civilian supremacy. So it should be actually formulated by the national government, the success criteria. As long as we have the request from the government, we will follow the instruction. We will carry out, as best as we could with all the assets, the resources that we have. But I think this should be discussed collaboratively between the national government, probably academia, academics, TNI, and also other agencies, because dealing with COVID-19 pandemic is not only related with TNI, but we also probably invite the police or the local authorities, the Ministry of Health, even there's economic impact. We might include those related ministries as well, and we have a number of coordinating ministries. I think that should be decided collectively, and it goes back to the national government. It's beyond our control as a TNI, as a military organization, what we actually do at this stage, despite the legal issues Diandra pointed out. Well, we're just doing our best to contribute to help fulfill the end state of the national strategy. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak. So, Ibu Diandra, what do you think? Can the civilian authority deal with this problem without the TNI? Is there an exit point you see for the TNI in this context?
Okay. Well, actually, I sympathize with the military personnel because they don't have any option besides following the rules and following the direction from the civilian authorities or the military chief itself. So, well, they actually don't have any option. What option do we have is from civilian side, actually. Is about the willingness and the political will from the government itself to set the limit, as you Professor mentioned before, and the paradigm should be put under the principle of military operation other than war itself, which is put the military as a last resort, and took the involvement limited to the very particular types that really needed by the civilian institution. So it's not at all the context, all the roles that they are playing, but only limited to the types that really needed by the civilian institution, and it should be a temporarily, because if it's prolonged, as I said, it will increase the tendency of militarization itself. So if the government once again follows the TNI law, it is enough to provide a limitation and context for the TNI involvement. However, I could say that in the last 5 years, many defense analysts has always repeated the same message to government and to the House of Representatives, but they are just ignore it. I don't know why. Still, they keep being like that up until now. So that's why I'm just repeat it again. So thank you, Professor and Pak Frega.
Thank you, Pak Frega. Thank you, Ibu Diandra. It's just been a fabulous and very illuminating session for all of us interested in this topic. The TNI is a very significant institution.
Leonard, could I add one point?
Yes.
Yeah,
please go ahead.
I think from the UK perspective, because I'm studying the UK, I was actually surprised how the UK has evolved its joint doctrine publication. In 2017, is actually the doctrine says that defense is no longer viewed as the last resort options. Rather, it is increasingly seen as supporting the lead government department in the context of resilience and security, using for pandemic, national, disaster. So there's also an evolving discussion of this role. So I think it's very critical. I mean, this discussion is very valid in the context of Indonesia, but might be useful to see other countries evolve as well. That's my point for that one, Pak. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Frega. Ibu Diandra, do you have any comment, last comment to Pak Frega?
Well, I haven't read that, so Pak Frega, if you've been kind to give me the document itself, it will be nice for me.
Fantastic. I want to just thank both of you for sharing so generously your knowledge throughout the course of this webinar. As we can see, actually, this discussion has allowed us the opportunity to analyze a little bit about military operations other than war, and how basically you have actually a learning environment here with the employment of the TNI in a pandemic situation. Of course, there have been other examples as well. The TNI in the context of counterterrorism, the TNI's role in dealing with or assisting the government in dealing with natural disasters. So these are all learning opportunities for both the TNI and civilian authority to work together to develop a useful doctrine on military operations other than war that will be unique to the operating environment of Indonesia. And I believe both of you have shared some very important and useful insights that have helped us understand better the complexity of the COVID-19 environment in Indonesia, the utility of the TNI in assisting the national government in bolstering its capacity. But I do believe that it's also important to take into consideration concerns that civil society will have relating to the expanded role of the TNI. And hence it's quite critical to keep the channels of communication open between both the military sector and the civilian sector. And thankfully we've had this opportunity this afternoon to actually engage in a very productive dialogue between Pak Frega, a serving TNI officer, and of course it's just brilliant to have the opportunity to have a serving TNI officer actually give a presentation. Not so easy in the context of the challenges in terms of dealing with the chain of command and all that. So I'm thankful, Pak Frega. In fact, we RSIS are thankful that you are present, and also a real thanks to Ibu Diandra. Your presence here today is a real it validates the desire that we all had back in 2007 in terms of establishing the Indonesian Defense University as an epistemic community whereby civilians and the military can communicate and can work together in terms of dealing with the complex problems faced by Indonesia. So I thank you both for your participation this afternoon, and also let me thank our events unit, particularly Scott and Anthony. There was a small technical hitch that I faced here, and thank you for their invaluable help in helping us organize this webinar. Thank my colleague also, Adi, Dr. Adi, who helped to organize this webinar for us. Also, I'm mindful of the fact that Pak Frega and Ibu Diandra are Menandonis, so I should convey to them our warmest wishes for a Selamat Hari Natal. Since we are in the month of December, and all our attendees who celebrate Christmas, wishing all of you a Merry Christmas, and for those of you looking forward to the holidays to come, I hope you have a really restful holiday, and we look forward to a better 2021. Yeah, hopefully with by the end of Q1, that would be March 2021, a vaccine could be rolled out in Indonesia, and we'll meet again to discuss the role of the TNI then, in terms of helping the civilian government in ensuring that people are vaccinated and that the health situation in Indonesia stabilizes, because we definitely want to travel to Indonesia. I kind of miss not having my regular enjoyable makanan khas in Indonesia. So on that note, terima kasih atas ilmunya. Semoga setelah pandemi berakhir, kita bisa saling baku dapak di Manado ataupun di Jakarta. So thank you very much.